All right, so we're excited to welcome John Schonfeld, who you can see from the chat needs no introduction, but he is our food and community gardening specialist, our statewide specialist of one of our faculty members here at Extension. He's also the director of our Home and Garden Information Center, and we're excited to have him present the first half of our microgreen session, and the second will be Carol Allen, who's with our Plant Sciences Department. So John, I'm going to let you get started.
Great. Thank you, Steph. I want to thank Caitlin and Steph for inviting me. And I especially want to thank Steph Pulley for making this presentation cute.
That's what we do, John.
Okay. So the principles and the practices that we use to grow microgreens are the very same ones that we use to grow other baby plants. So think about growing vegetable, flower, and herb transplants, winter sowing. And if you're growing some microgreens at home, I'll just reiterate Steph's invitation, and that is that you can put into the chat your tips, your hacks, things that you've been successful or unsuccessful with. And I'm sure we'd all be really interested to learn from each of us. Okay, well, people have been growing baby plants and eating them for medicinal purposes throughout human history. In the US, microgreens really got their start in the San Francisco Bay Area. And it's projected that in 2028, the global market will be nearly $4 billion. And to put that in a little bit of context, the global market for all types of lettuces in 2023 was $4 billion. So this enterprise has really grown, the demand's grown, production is really ramped up. And I think that for our Grow and Eat It program, microgreens can be a really great tool for teaching people about growing food. It makes food gardening really accessible because it can be done in so many different ways. So let's talk about harvest stages for our different growth points for mostly leafy greens. So we know that we're going to be harvesting sprouts 2 to 8 days after we sow the seed. With microgreens, we're going to be harvesting somewhere between 7 and 21 days. For a lot of our crops that we're probably going to be interested in planting as microgreens, the harvest time will probably be more like 10 to 14 days. Some of the crops do take a little bit longer. When we harvest microgreens, we're harvesting the entire plant. There's no regrowth. We're harvesting the stem, the seed leaves, the cotyledons, and then the emerging true leaves. And if we're growing baby greens, of course, we're going to allow the plants to continue to grow for a couple of more weeks. And then for mature greens like kale and certain lettuces, it may be 40 to 60 days before we're harvesting. So microgreens, really, just about anybody can grow microgreens in just about any situation. If you have the time, the interest, and the space, you can really grow them continuously through the year at home. Microgreens in the supermarket now, at the low end, they're $2 to $3 per ounce. And so if we grow just a typical greenhouse flat, that's 10 inches by 20 inches in size with microgreens, we'll harvest at least 6 ounces. So think about that. That's $12 to $18 of microgreen value. And so really, just about any way we choose to grow them, we're going to save money. Even if we go and buy a nice new LED strip light, we're going to be able to make that cost back pretty quickly. As far as eating microgreens, so why do we want to eat these little 3-inch tall plants? Well, part of it is their visual appeal, and we'll see more examples of that. They come in many different leaf shapes, leaf textures, flavors. The flavor really is in the leaves, in the true leaves. The cotyledons and the stems add succulence, they add texture. And these baby plants are highly nutritious. And that is really what's been driving demand. And we know this from a number of research studies, and there are more each year. And actually, several of them, and some of the earlier ones, were done by faculty at the University of Maryland in our Nutrition and Food Sciences department. And so, what research is showing is that when we're evaluating the levels of macro and micronutrients, and even more importantly, perhaps, those secondary metabolites, the phytochemicals that include our antioxidants, what researchers are finding is there's quite a bit of difference in the levels of nutrients and the bioactive compounds between different crops and even between the varieties of different species. They're finding that in many cases, the levels of bioactive compounds are higher, and in some cases, 4 to 10 times higher in the baby greens compared to the mature counterpart of that same plant, which is really significant and interesting. And that these levels of nutrients and phenolics are affected by light source, light intensity, storage, and the amount of time that the plants are growing. And so, for example, in several studies, higher light intensity increased phenolic compounds. So these are the antioxidants that can help neutralize free radicals in plants and in people. And just one little snapshot from one study. So in looking at the carotenoid levels of 25 different microgreen species, they found that these 5 were right at the top. And interestingly, cilantro, red cabbage, some of those colorful amaranths, and daikon radish also were very high in quite a few of the antioxidants. So what I'd like to do is really just cover some of the simple supplies that are needed and the steps that we need to take. So here's a picture of a young red, I think it's a red giant mustard plant. And you can see, we can't see the stem, we see the cotyledons, these seed leaves, and then the first set of true leaves emerging. So at this point, or maybe in another day or two, this would be harvested as a microgreen. So we need seeds. We're going to sow them thickly and evenly. We need some type of shallow container. We need growing media or some type of a growing mat that'll support the seeds and allow the roots to grow. And of course, we need this combination of light, heat, and water, and we will be harvesting in 7 to 21 days. So what can we grow? It's incredible. These are some of the faster and easier crops. And if you notice, from arugula all the way over to cress, we're in the Brassicaceae family. And so these are crops that germinate quickly and grow quickly, lots of great flavors, colors, and textures. But notice we have other plants that we wouldn't typically think about as leafy greens, but in this miniature baby plant stage, indeed they are. Lettuces have a place in microgreens, in mixes. They are very fragile, though. They're more tender than most of the other species that we're going to be growing, but certainly they can be used as well. Some of the slower germinating and slower growing microgreen crops are listed here, including all of those amaranths like beets and callaloo, Swiss chard. Okra, I've never grown okra as a microgreen, but I see it's a real thing now when I Googled it. And the herbs are really create a great, of course, flavor palette for microgreens. They are slower growing, of course, and the seeds are going to be more expensive. And then finally, spinach is a great one to grow. It is a little more slower growing. It's in that same Amaranthaceae family. One of the knocks on spinach is that the seed hulls tend to stick to the tips of the seed leaves, the cotyledons. It's not really a big deal. You see that with your tomato plants, your pepper plants. With spinach, it's more noticeable, but they can easily be, pushed off the plants when you're rinsing them off. So that's spinach. So there are lots of ways to jump in to starting with microgreens. You might have some seeds left over from last year. We all have food grade containers that we can repurpose at home. And maybe you can identify a really sunny spot in your kitchen or another room, or maybe you have a grow light. So you can really think about what you have, the conditions in your house, how can you get started? And after that, if you like what you see and you're curious, you can change it up with the crops that you grow, and you can try uh, crops that will provide a different flavor palette, different colors, textures. You can try different types of containers. You can move them to different locations. I would warn you, if you have cats, you know how cats are. So cats and microgreens aren't going to mix very well. You've got to have a way to keep them separate. And in the photo here at the top left, you can see clear container, which is really fun because then you can see, the roots growing. So lots of different ways to get started. Seeds. We want to reduce our seed costs as much as possible. Why? Each, standard greenhouse flat of microgreens can hold, between 2,000 and 4,000 seeds approximately. That's a lot of seeds. So if we're buying individual packets of seed, we're going to be paying a lot more per seed. So here's arugula, 5,000 seeds. That's 8 or 10 grams, maybe $3.50. But if we go over and we decide, hey, we're going to make the investment, get a quarter pound, we're going to have 9 times as many seeds for less than twice the price. So it really makes sense, to buy in bulk. You can also look, of course, for non-hybrid seeds. They will be less expensive. And if you're growing a lot of these crops listed here that produce a lot of seed in the garden, you can save some of your own seed for growing. Seeding rates. So this can be a little daunting. We're going to be sprinkling a lot of seed over a small area. Don't worry, it's really not that hard to do. Just spend a little time practicing. There are several approaches. If you really get into growing microgreens, you'll start learning how many grams of seed it's going to take to seed a specific size container. So if you have a gram scale, you can actually weigh out the seeds. Once you figure out how many seeds you need by volume, if you want to go that route, you can use, say, a tablespoon. And with broccoli, we know that a tablespoon contains about 10 grams of seed. That's about 4,000 seeds, folks. And you can just use that 1 tablespoon and sprinkle them evenly over your container area. And if you're just using your eyeballs, which is what I do, I just try to get them nice and evenly distributed. Somewhere a little less than a quarter inch apart is what most people feel is a good seeding density. And you can see, I don't know what plants these are. It might be radish. There are a lot of cool radish varieties that have very red stems. And you can see just how thickly those seeds have been sown. And again, a standard greenhouse flat could have, 4,000 or more seeds planted. So that's seeding rates. There are some seeds that will germinate more quickly if they're soaked for several hours before planted. And it's usually around 4 hours, but to get the specifics, you can go online and find out how many specific hours are needed so we can pre-soak to get faster germination. So I want to talk just a little bit about different possibilities for seeding trays. This is one we purchased a few years ago at HGIC just to test it out. And it's designed for, uh, uh, growing transplants or microgreens. It's a 20-row flat. So it's basically 20 narrow channels that are about an inch deep. There are holes in the bottom of the black tray, and it just sits inside this white tray that has no holes. So essentially, we're going to have some bottom watering, and these are really effective. They cost about $3 a piece. Not necessary, but they do work really well. I just wanted to show you what the results can look like. So on the left, we have one of these 20-row trays. So in the foreground is just a strip of plants that were harvested. Um, this was right when we were going to cut or right after. So you can see the roots that are growing in the media. They look really healthy. On the right, we sowed seeds in just the white flat that had no holes in the bottom. It's a solid bottom flat, 1 inch deep. And for whatever reason, the results were not as good. So same seeds, same lighting and everything. Now this is just, one example, one time. We didn't get as good growth in the single flat that had no holes in the bottom. And here's a close up of, again, what that root system looks like coming out of this 20-row flat. And here's the flat or the insert flipped over. So you can see where the drainage holes are because you can see the roots have grown through them and down into the water below. Let's save some money and use all those wonderful food grade plastic containers that we have laying around, maybe from carry out or from purchasing groceries. So in this case, I think it was a strawberry container. We have holes in the bottom. We can cut the top off and use it as a saucer to go below. Lots of different types of containers we can repurpose in this way. You see really nice growth here, and you can see the cotyledon leaves and the beginning of the true leaves. I'm not sure what we were growing there. Okay, on to media. So we need a way to hold the seed in place and give the roots a place to grow and a way for the roots to be exposed to water, to have water available. So I kind of divided this slide up into media that are reusable, perhaps, and that would be soilless grow mix, which a lot of us have. This is a really good way to get started with microgreens, and it works really well. Some people like to use coconut coir. We can soak a brick of it and in water, pull the fibers apart and use that as our growing media. We have some newer media types, and you can find these from companies that sell microgreen supplies. They sell these fiber mats made from all different types of materials, and some of them can just be cut to fit into specific size containers. Some of them can be purchased, that will fit a 10, 20 greenhouse flat. They're not supposed to be reusable. I haven't tried these. If you have used them, you might want to put into the chat your experience with them. But they're advertised as not reusable. And then we've got the reusable silicone mats, which I think are really interesting. You can see microgreens growing on top of the mat, and the roots are growing down through the mesh mat into water, into a tray of water, and they're growing very well. They can be reused. So it's basically a hydroponic system. So something to think about. I'm not sure how much those cost, but The growing media, the soilless
Hey,
mixes.
John, can we
Yeah,
go back really quick?
good.
Okay, so the core is listed under possibly reusable and not reusable, so folks were looking for that distinction there.
Okay, right. So under possibly reasonable, this is where you buy a brick, you're taking it apart, and so you'll have an inch of this, fibrous coconut coir at the bottom of a container. With the mat, I don't know how they knit it all together, but it's literally a mat that might be a half an inch thick. I don't know what other materials might be in it. So, right, what is the difference? I don't really know. I think with the coconut coir, we can once we harvest the microgreens, we can dry that coir out and we can reuse it possibly. I haven't reused coconut coir, but I have reused soilless growing media and it works fine. So with the fiber mat, if it's made out of coconut coir, you can see if it's possible to dry it out, get as much of the root system off of it and reuse it. I'm just letting you know that it's advertised as not reusable, but perhaps it can be.
And then can you also touch on soilless growing mix? Some folks are a little confused by that.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm
Thank you.
talking about is basically potting mix. It's called a lot of different things, growing mixes, available in lots of varieties. So we're looking for lightweight mixes. They'll typically have peat, coir, or compost as a primary ingredient. Also, they might have perlite, vermiculite. They do have a fertilizer charge, so they do have nutrients. So this is what you're, growing your vegetable transplants in container plants. So I estimate, it depends on the type that you purchase, but using 3 or 4 quarts to create that 1 inch depth of growing media in a traditional greenhouse flat, it could cost $1 to $2.50. So here on the right, I've basically harvested my microgreens, thrown all the media in a container. I'm going to let it dry out, and then I can screen it. I can screen out most of the roots, reuse it. If I'm reusing it, I'm going to mix it with fresh media. So this is a hack. This is just a way to try to be more resourceful, less wasteful, and save money. Something to try, and figure out what's going to work best for you. So, what about the nutrients? How are these plants going to grow if we're using these inert materials like, a fiber mat or a silicon mat? Well, there's enough energy, there are enough food resources in the seed to get it through the beginning of the true leaf stage. An advantage of the soilless mixes is they have that nutrient charge. They have a little bit of fertilizer added. And so you're going to get somewhat stronger growth with a soilless mix. So we're following our steps here. We've got our container, we have our seeds. We're filling the container with about an inch of, in this case, soilless mix, potting mix. We're sowing our seeds. It can be a little difficult against that dark soilless mix, potting mix, to see dark seeds. It's a lot easier to see light colored seeds. Um, and then in terms of covering the seeds, there are some species, some of our herbs, our lettuces, they actually germinate better in light, under light conditions. But most other seeds will germinate better if they are in a dark environment. So you can either cover your seeds with a very light um, layer of the soilless growing mix, or you can just lay a small piece of black plastic over the seed flat, over the container until the seeds germinate. Now, you're going to find if you really research microgreen growing, commercial growers often create what they call a blackout period for their plants, for their trays. So they're not only covering plants to get the seeds to germinate faster, but they want to get some stretch in those stems. And so they'll use these blackout domes. They cost about $12 a piece. And so the point is to get a longer, stronger stem or a longer stem, and that's going to make it easier for them to harvest, and it increases the weight of their product. So I don't find that it's necessary at all, but you might want to think about a way to cover the seeds to hasten germination. No thinning necessary. We're going to cut them all and eat them all. So another thing that's really important to point out, you want to grow similar plants in similar containers. So plants and species that have similar germination rates and growth rates, keep them together in their own container. So left photo, we've got 2 rows of radishes. They germinate quickly, they grow rapidly, they're large. And then next to those 2 rows of cress, which is germinating more slowly, growing more slowly. And then we've got, I think, arugula. And so you see 3 different rates of growth. It makes it difficult to water, to manage the light, and to harvest. And on the right, the same situation. In the foreground, we've got a beet mixture and then cilantro in the next couple of rows. And then the very little tiny plants are magenta spring, which is a really cool amaranth, very colorful, and then more of the beet green. So you can see a lot of variability. Better just to grow like plants together. If you throw your seeds on top of the growing mix, you may see these white fuzzies, and it's very alarming. It can make you think that you've got a mold problem when it's really just this proliferation of root hairs that are looking for water. So if you cover your seeds, you're not going to really see this. I see it more in brassicas when I seed on top of the soil and don't press them in well enough, but not really an issue. So moving on to light, water, and heat, they're interconnected. Uh, Maybe you can find a spot in your home where there's enough natural light coming in to grow certain microgreens. And we know lettuces and some of the brassicas really can germinate and grow pretty well under not very high light conditions. So you might try those first. Supplemental lights will absolutely help the plants grow faster. So if you really want to produce a lot of microgreens, it's probably a good investment. Just one 4-foot LED strip light. Look for a light that is mimicking natural daylight. So it'll have like a 4,500 to 6,500 Kelvin rating. And you can play around with how high to keep the light from the microgreens, depending on whether you want a longer stem, etc. So a lot of commercial growers keep their lights 6 to 12 inches from the plants. You can run your lights when electricity is cheapest to save some money. The watering thing, if you go online and look at what commercial growers are doing, a lot of them are using dechlorinated water. They may be using deionized water. I have found that tap water works just fine. I don't even let it sit around for any chlorine to vaporize off. I haven't seen any negative effects. Maybe I would get better results if I used distilled water. I don't know. Our municipal water tends to be, the pH can be up around 7.8, which isn't great for growing plants. But again, I have not seen any issues with municipal water. So you can try both and see what you think.
John, can you say the
Yeah.
light wattages again?
Yeah. So basically, the thing to look for is the Kelvin rating. Look
Thank
for
you.
grow lights that say that they mimic natural light or they mimic sunlight. That's what you want. You don't want lights that are going to have too much far red or are too blue. So 4,500 Kelvin to 6,500 Kelvin would be a good range.
And sorry, we had one
Yeah.
more for the potting
Oh,
mix,
yeah, yeah.
just because we're here. If there's a seedling mix, sometimes they have like the seed starting soil mixes. Would you use that or just regular potting soil?
You can absolutely, the seedling mixes will be a little more finely milled, the materials that are in them. So the pore spaces are smaller. It's not necessary. You can use a coarser mix unless you're using some extremely small seed. And even with seeds like basil, mustard, I don't have any problems using something like Pro Mix, which is much more coarse than a seedling mix. So I personally wouldn't spend extra money for the seed starting mix. But
Okay.
you
And
can
some
try,
folks are
yeah.
asking about seeds that have a coating on them, if you can still use them.
Oh, right. Yes, you can. I would, well, that's a good question. I haven't used coated seed. You're going to pay more for coated seed. That's more going to be more helpful when you're seeding outdoors than indoors. So I wouldn't buy coated seed. You're going to spend more money and it's just not necessary. So just buy uncoated seeds, untreated, uncoated seeds.
Okay. And then, sorry, because you're already talking about water. Folks have well water. If they have that, is there a lower pH limit?
Yeah, I mean, I would just test it out. If you're growing house plants and transplants well with your well water, there's probably not going to be a problem. I know water softeners can add enough sodium to be a problem. So if you're using a water softener, if you're on well water, you can test the water by trying to grow some microgreens and see what the results are. But again, if you're using water in your house now to grow transplants or you're using it on your house plants without a problem, then it shouldn't be a problem on the microgreens.
Okay.
And Carol
Awesome.
may
All good.
have something else to add to that when she talks about food safety.
Thank you.
Sure, sure. So germinating temperatures, most of our different crops that we're going to grow for microgreens will germinate best at 70 to 75 degrees. It's not necessary to use a heat mat unless your room is fairly cool. The growing temperature ideally would be a little bit less than that. But folks, how many of us have that level of control over the temperature in any given, area in a room in our house? So, the seeds are going to germinate fine at 68 degrees, at, 65, at 70, 75. Um, and you can, again, just try out different, locations and different techniques to get the best results. You definitely want to make sure that you're not up against, a wall, or your plants are not being blocked so that air is not moving freely around them. We want good air circulation, just like we would with any other kinds of plants that we're growing. Now, the fun part, we get to harvest. And again, for most of the crops we're going to be growing, that's going to happen in 10 to 14 days, probably. We're going to cut right above the soil line, sharp, clean scissors or knife. I like to put my microgreens right in the fridge, in the coolest part of the fridge, and they will last, for really 10 days at least in the refrigerator. And when I pull them out to use, that's when I rinse them. That's when I rinse them with water. You're not going to get regrowth from your little baby microgreens. And of course, you want to wash and sanitize your containers and trays before you reuse them. So I wanted to just talk a minute about baby greens, because if we like microgreens, we can just let them keep growing to the baby green stage. Although actually it's a different system. We're going to be seeding at much lower rates. So our seeding rate is going to be maybe a half an inch to an inch apart, either broadcast or in rows. I like to grow baby greens because you're just going to get more to eat. I don't know how the nutrient and phytochemical levels compare. They're probably less than with microgreens. But if you have the space and you eat a lot of leafy greens, um, it's fun to try. In the store, you're going to pay up to $1 an ounce. And again, we can harvest probably 8 to 12 ounces of baby greens when they're in this stage about 3 weeks after sowing seeds. So I'm just going to show you what I did in my office a few weeks ago. I have this nice LED strip light. Here's the underside of the light. And I grew kale and lettuce in containers and then harvested them. So on the right, 21 days later, I've got, I don't know, a little over 3 ounces of kale. So it wasn't, it didn't fit a whole greenhouse flat. It was a smaller container, but still a nice yield for a first cutting. And then I've got them continuing to grow right now, and I'll cut them in another week or so. And here's the lettuce. We got almost 5 ounces from these two repurposed trays. And a couple of them had holes in them, one didn't. So again, you can play around with whether you like using holes with trays or not. You just have to be much more careful with your watering, obviously, if your trays, your containers don't have drainage holes in the bottom. And we can grow these baby greens and microgreens outdoors in a variety of containers. And I wanted to finish up by just making a pitch for us as extension educators to use baby plants more in our teaching activities, to take our baby plants out with us. We can grow them any time of the year. Um, they're great to bring to events, classes, plant clinics. They really draw people to us so that then we can use them for teaching. So upper right, we've got peas that are being winter sown. We've got baby greens, really colorful. And next down, we've got sweet potato shoots that are being propagated to plant out in late spring. And then at the bottom, baby greens growing in a container. So we can take these plants. They're very portable. They're fun to work with. We can pop them out of the containers to talk about, root growth. And we can use them to, talk to people about the interaction of air and water and soil and plant roots and microorganisms, et cetera. And we can also talk about sustainability. If we're bringing in and showing people how to use repurposed containers, things that would normally be thrown out, we can talk about plastic reduction. So the 4 R's are, I think, reduce, reuse, recycle, and rethink. So we can really show those really important messages to our clientele using the baby plants. So I know Steph's going to share the PDF. There are some resources for microgreen growing, and also for, if you're interested in some research articles, there's a ton out there, really interesting stuff that's happening. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And before there are questions, I just wanted to show you a couple of examples of microgreens. And unfortunately, my other camera hasn't been zooming in. So I just wanted to show you some kale that I started last Friday. Our building lost its heat for a day or so, so germination was really slow. But germination, not great. And I just threw the seeds on top of the mix. I pressed them in, but I didn't cover the seeds. And so I think it really does pay to put a black piece of plastic or some growing media over the seeds, and I think you'll get better germination. Notice too, this container is a little deeper than I would like because I'll have to go down with my scissors to cut at the soil level. So I can either cut the container down, or there'll be enough of a mat of roots in a couple more days. I can just turn this upside down and take them out and cut them outside the container. Here's another food takeout container, and you can see it's clear, so it's nice to be able to see the root growth. Let's see if I, yeah, there we go. At the bottom, no holes in this container. So I'm just really careful how I water. And this is also kale. um, and then the lettuce, this is a container, a little aluminum container that, let's see, there we go, has holes in the bottom. I did, as I mentioned, cut the baby greens last week, and you can see there's already been a lot of nice regrowth right uh, below the cut that I made last week. And next week, I'll do a second harvest of these baby greens. And then finally, here's the tray that I was talking about, the 20 row tray. And you can see the drainage holes in the bottom. And then the white plastic tray that's very shallow. And this is the one that provides the reservoir of water that the roots can grow in. That's it for me, Steph.
Okay, great. We've got a lot of follow-up questions. Okay, so Carol is, there's another comment on the well water. If your well water has been treated to be softened, then it would have a lot of salts. So would that be an issue?
It can be. I mean, I think I would just test it out. Grow some of these plants, use that water, see what the results are. You can also look online. I don't know off the top of my head what would be considered an excessively high sodium level, for example, that would be damaging to roots. I don't know if Carol would have that, or we can look it up for you. But there's a way to determine what level would be injurious to typical plant roots.
If your total dissolved salt is over 200 parts per million, you may start getting problems in some species. As you know,
Thanks.
plants have a wide range of salt tolerances.
Awesome. All right, next question is, do I need to buy special microgreen seeds or can I just use regular seeds?
Regular seeds. So what's sold is microgreen seeds. They're just advertising it that way. But sometimes what they do is they'll make a mix. So microgreens that might be fun to eat together, but that may mean that they don't grow so well together. So I would recommend buying in quantity the separate seeds, and then you can decide if you want to make a blend so that you're cutting them all at the same time or not.
Okay. And there was one question about salmonella when growing the greens, but then Carol said she would cover that in her presentation. Um, One guest says that the lettuce pack, the seeds instructions on the lettuce pack says to plant them 8 inches apart. And how can we grow the microgreens so close together?
Yeah, so that's for out in the garden. So yeah, you can plant lettuce a quarter inch apart to have microgreen lettuce. That's what you're really shooting for.
Okay, can you clarify again what should be cut and come again and what should be harvested and then replanted?
Right. So microgreens, these are the little baby plants. We're growing to a height of about 3 inches. We're sowing the seeds really thickly. And when we harvest the microgreens, we're cutting the plants off at the soil level, right there at the base of the plant. So we're harvesting the stem, the cotyledon seeds, leaves, and the true leaves. That's the microgreen. With the baby greens, we're letting them grow to maybe 6 to 8 inches in height. We're cutting them. They're going to be spaced farther apart in the tray. And after a couple of weeks after that first harvest, we can come back and harvest again, maybe even a third time.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, when you cover your seeds for germination, are you just covering the top of the container or does your cover press down on the seed soil mixture?
Yeah, just covering the container. If the plastic is touching the seeds, it's really not going to matter. but you're just covering the container. That's what you're shooting for.
Okay. And we did cover this, but we just got another question for clarification. Is well water that tested an 8.2 pH too high to use?
That is pretty high. I mean, I would say I would experiment with it. That is a high pH, but I would test it out and see. I don't have an experience using, but you know, municipal water is 7.8. So again, the microgreen, the water is there to hydrate the seed. The resources that the plant's going to need to grow to that 3-inch height is all inside the seed. That 8.2 pH water might not be a critical factor.
Awesome. Okay, great. So that's the questions that we have for John right now.
All right, so I'm going to talk about the produce safety end of microgreens and understand that I work primarily with commercial growers, but you'd be surprised what they see is going to apply to what you do. So I have to do the obligatory for justice and justice for all. And you need to know, as you probably already know, that the University of Maryland does not discriminate in any way, shape, or form from anyone, regardless of what they might be. Okay. And this funding was brought to you by FDA through a grant, which we hope continues continually. Right. Hold your breath. Okay. So why produce safety? All right. So my job is to help farmers, and that includes all of those folks that are just getting into farming, moving from that backyard, or in the term in with when it comes to microgreens, it might be the second bedroom is their farm because they're doing microgreens. So we want to reduce the risk of hazards in the food stream, and that's your food stream, your personal private food stream too. So physical hazards can be broken glass, tools, little bits of tools that might break off. We don't want that. Chemical hazards are keeping your sanitizer concentrates, your cleaning concentrates, any pesticides far, far away from your growing area. But primarily, I'm going to zero in on microbial hazards and how do we prevent that kind of cross-contamination. And what works in commercial actually does apply to you guys at home. So we're talking about keeping your hands clean and your clothing clean, keeping your sanitation high in your growing area, minimizing or eliminating pests such as cockroaches and mice. Both of those critters carry human diseases. Cockroaches, bet you didn't know that. All right. We've got poor cleaning and sanitizing practices that can be a problem. It's just poor housekeeping. John mentioned cats. Yes, I have that issue. All right. And even more important, I'm going to talk about seed contamination and water contamination, which we hope we don't have. So we know that microbes, and we're talking about largely, I'm going to be zeroing in on human pathogens. And a lot of times they're bacterial, but not entirely. They can be parasites too. So the microbes of most concern for us are going to be E. coli and a particular kind of E. coli, 0157H7, which can cause hemorrhagic uremia. This is what kills people. And it is prevalent in animal feces and in general in the environment and in the soil. Salmonella mentioned that somebody mentioned salmonella earlier. We know that animals carry it. Poultry in particular, it has been a food safety issue in eggs. Listeria monocytogenes, big mouthful of a word, prefers cool temperatures, whereas the E. coli and salmonella, kind of like the same conditions that we're in. Listeria is the one that actually likes it a little chillier and moist, and it's frequently a problem in drains. So think about the drain in your shed or in your basement or any place like that where it could have been exposed to animal feces or soil. That can be an issue, but it is a common soil-borne pathogen. So we have it, it's out there. Campylobacter, another fun one that was found associated with poultry and usually untreated water. And that's why I mentioned untreated water, okay? If you're getting your water source from a pond or a rain barrel, people, all right, that is surface water and that is exposed to the environment. That means it's exposed to some of these guys I just talk about. So whereas most of our pathogens thrive in the same conditions that we employ, okay, body temperature, they also thrive in the same conditions that microgreens are grown in. And it's important to know that your plant pathogens, your spoilage microbes, and human pathogens follow the same paths. All right. So when I talk about food sanitation in the grow space, I'm thinking actually in the back of my head as a horticulturist, which is what I am. All right, is I'm also looking at my plant pathogens and my spoilage pathogens. Okay. We need to remind ourselves that microbes move very easily by both water and by dust. All right. So keep that in mind. Now, when I work with farmers, I am working with farmers that grow foods that are typically eaten raw. So this is all of our leafy greens, things like tomatoes, melons, peppers, cucumbers, and a whole raft of other foods that are typically vegetables and fruits that are typically eaten raw. Okay, so where does microgreens come in this? Well, they're frequently eaten raw. They are not generally presented with a kill step, which would be cooking or preserving with sugar or salts. All right, so we have an increased risk with this particular type of product. And although we don't have any multi-state foodborne illnesses, underline that, illnesses, outbreaks in the United States, we do have some recalls because of presence of some of our fun pathogens that we don't want. In particular, I'll bring your attention to December of 2022. There was a Wegmans voluntary recall due to salmonella present in contaminated soils where the microgreens were being grown. And that recall actually covered 7 states. Another company by the name of Junction Microfarm in November of 2021, salmonella again was found in the growing area with their microgreens. And then Sunsprout, which grows not only microgreens but sprouts, in September of 2020 also had issues with a voluntary recall. A voluntary recall is where a group of folks, and we have them in Maryland, and some of our cohorts, my cohorts in MDA, will make periodic stops into a growing facility, and they'll do what is called environmental sampling. And I love to do environmental sampling. It's so much fun. Generally, I don't find anything, so it's kind of defeating. But we will swab certain areas, like maybe a sorting table or a grow area, and then we'll send that to the lab to be grown out for E. coli, Listeria, and Salmonella. It's usually the big 3. And so when that group goes to a facility and finds that there is presence of one of these pathogens, then they do what is called a voluntary recall. That means the company recalls the product that might have been impacted by those surfaces, say for instance, and it is taken off the market. There's no harm, no foul to that. Okay, they don't get penalized, they don't get jailed or anything. These tours of these facilities are made in an attempt to prevent foodborne illness outbreaks. So even though we can say microgreens, we've not seen any illness outbreaks, we have found presence of pathogens in growing areas. All right, so what do we do to prevent foodborne illness outbreaks? Well, it's kind of what I do all day. So I teach good agricultural practices, and that is developing a set of protocols, procedures and protocols in the growing area from seeding all the way to harvest that reduce the contamination, generally by fecal material, in that production facility. Okay, I work with farmers both for pre-harvest, that's that growing stage, and post-harvest. Much beyond post-harvest, if the product goes to like processing, then another set of protocols kicks in that's called good handling practices. And we actually teach that here at the University of Maryland. Okay, so good agricultural practices is a voluntary program. A farmer may decide, okay, I want to expand my sales market. I want to encourage more buyers. And in particular, wholesale buyers are probably going to ask you if you are GAP certified. It's a mark of following certain food safety procedures and protocols. What I really want to do is get more managers of farm markets to require good agricultural practices certification of their vendors, and to let the public know that if they're sporting that logo, and MDA has their own GAP logo, that is a producer where the potential of foodborne illness has been decreased, okay? So just to give you a little history, in the mid-1990s, the government realized that we were seeing an uptick in foodborne illnesses associated with fresh fruits and vegetables. Before, the leaders of the pack had been dairy, eggs, and meats, but now fruits and vegetables were coming up in numbers. So U.S. Food and Drug Administration published this guide, which is online and it's still very viable, called Guide to Minimize Microbial Food Safety Hazards for Fresh Fruits and Vegetables. You can tell they like real succinct titles. No, not really. Okay, so this ended up being developed into the good agricultural practices. And by 2002, we were doing good agricultural practices audits at certain production facilities. By 2011, the law, Food Safety Modernization Act, produce safety rule was signed into law, and good agricultural practices is the basis for the federal law. So GAP, voluntary, you want your farmer to be GAP certified, all right? And the law is required, and it's based on production dollars. So most of you guys probably wouldn't even come into that, all right? Okay, so in and outside of Maryland, we use GAP, okay, which is a voluntary annual certification. It requires a day of training. That's what I do. A farm food safety plan has to be written, and that's like a business plan with food safety in mind. Then all of those reduced risk practices and policies need to be implemented. Then MDA is called and they come and do an audit. There are higher level, more stringent policies and practices that are GAP, that are written by USDA. So USDA, MDA, there's several different levels of GAP. Now, your wholesale buyers are the ones that are going to require that, but restaurants, hospitals, and schools frequently require a grower to have a GAP certification. The produce safety rule, as I mentioned before, is a federal law, again requires a day of training, an implementation of practices, and now an inspection that's done on a 2 to 3 year cycle. Good agricultural practices is an annual cycle of audits. And the produce safety rule is based on annual sales of produce. And what you're saying, well, why? Because sales of produce is kind of an indication of their distribution impact. In other words, if I'm selling $100,000 worth of produce, I'm going to make a lot more people sick. I don't like to think of it that way. All right. But that's how the federal law works. Okay. But you all grow in the home. Why does it apply to you? It does. Okay. So quoting Elizabeth Scott and her work on food safety and foodborne disease in 21st century homes in the United States, and these numbers are a little old. That number is actually higher. Foodborne diseases cause an estimated of 76 million episodes of illness annually. 76 million people get sick. That report. Now, how many times do you have a little bit of a digestive upset? You don't even go to a walk-in clinic. You pop a couple of Imodium, you take it easy the next day. That could have been a foodborne illness. So there's 76 million is a low number of the annual illnesses caused by food consumption. In particular, a study of E. coli, that 0157H7 outbreaks in the US found that 80% of the suspect hamburgers were prepared and eaten at home. Yeah, not McDonald's, not Burger King, but home. Okay, so we do have an issue here. We need to keep in mind too that the data collection system misses home-based outbreaks. CDC is going to track a foodborne illness outbreak if it covers many states. It's not so many people, but many states. So if you have a foodborne illness outbreak that's confined into one state, it's not even going to make the CDC numbers, okay? So what it boils down to is improper food handling and preparation by consumers in their own kitchens. And that's why when I talk about eating microgreens, which is something that we eat fresh, no kill step, I'm going to talk about food safety in our own kitchens. Okay, so I introduced you to the microbes. Okay, we've got E. coli, we've got salmonella, we have listeria. Where do they come from? Okay, primarily, we're going to get that contamination from your substrate. Okay, that's your potting soil, dirty hands, dirty work surfaces and tools. Where were those scissors before? Who used those scissors for something else? Okay, then we get a lot of seed contamination. I'm going to talk a lot about that. And of course, our water source. So you want to start with a clean substrate. And I know we all kind of like to reuse, all right? But actually, this is one time that I'm going to say you're not going to reuse a soilless medium, all right? One of the soilless media that I particularly like and has been embraced by most of our commercial growers in our area, it used to be ProMix HP, which I was a ProMix girl for decades. I've actually moved over to Coco Loco. Coco Loco has a percentage of core, and because I'm a horticulturist, I'm very well aware that a peat moss based medium is a limited natural resource, and I'd rather see how well I can grow with something with a little bit more core in it. It requires a new skill set by me, the grower, but the Coco Loco is a peat and core combo, and I like it a lot. But okay, so where was your potting soil stored before you opened it up? Or, oh wow, did you use a partially opened bag that's been sitting in the garage for at least 3 years? Yeah. Is there mold covering it? Did myces nest in it? Has it been exposed to rain or just water of any sort? In other words, has it been contaminated? So my commercial growers will, of course, buy their media by the pallet load, and they actually write down the lot number because we worry about trace back in the face of a foodborne illness outbreak. Commercial growers going to want to know where that medium was before they got it, and they're going to trace it by lot number. The other way to look at it might be using a mat, either a core or a paper fiber mat. These are one use. They are recyclable, though. They will break down in your compost pile. Your soilless medium, once you've used it for microgreens, you could probably use it for another growing effort. Porch pots. I'd say that if you cleaned it out, you could probably use it for vegetable starts, particularly a vegetable start where you've got a kill step between harvest and eating it, okay? And you could reuse it that way. But for microgreens, I heartily recommend that you use a new soil every time and that you know where it came from. So it's going to be really important not to use your compost or your garden soil, though you may be tempted, all right, because that's where our human pathogens are hanging out. And particularly if you're using any biological soil amendments of animal origin in your compost or in your garden soil. So biological soil amendment of animal origin, isn't that a mouthful? So we're talking about manures. We're talking about post consumer vegetative waste. In other words, plate scrapings. Those are two types of inputs that you might use in your compost because they're high nitrogen and they're going to make your compost cook a little bit faster, but you're not going to want to use that compost for microgreens, okay? Because basically, you don't want to put anything in your microgreen growing facility that you wouldn't put in your mouth. That's putting it really baldly, but if it goes in your mouth, you want to know where it's been. Okay, so to start out, you're going to want to wash your hands, have clean clothes, and the area where you are growing needs to be cleaned and sanitized. So your work surface, your flats, cutting tools, if you're doing overhead watering with spray bottle, you want to have a cleaning and sanitizing protocol for that. Watering cans, so you're getting the water to the flat. Where has that watering can been? Has it been outside in the garden for like 18 months? and it's filled with dead insect bodies and bits of leaves and heaven only knows what, you want to clean and sanitize. So again, I reiterate, would you put it in your mouth? All right. And if you wouldn't, then we're going to clean and sanitize it. So let's talk about that. These are film clips that I made of my friend Andy Mussaw, who is the owner of Fresh Source Microgreens. And in the upper right-hand corner, dyslexic, upper left-hand corner, that is Andy in the middle of the scrubbing part of the cleaning and sanitizing protocol. And then he's doing the same thing with his flats in the lower right-hand corner. So what is this all about? So here's your protocol. This is cleaning and sanitizing. And notice you don't say one without the other. You cannot sanitize a surface that has not had the field soil and organic matter removed first. So it's always cleaning and sanitizing. I want to make that like one word, cleaning and sanitizing. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to remove your visible soil and organic matter. And let's say, for instance, you're using one of those flats. So you're probably just going to scrape off the organic matter. You might give it a little pre-rinse outside so that all of the dirt and roots kind of go into the compost pile. And then if it's a dry surface like your countertop, you're going to moisten the surface. It doesn't have to be technical there. You're going to apply a little squirt of dish detergent. Which dish detergent? Any detergent that is appropriate for you washing dishes, all right? That means our favorite in the industry, in the food safety industry, is Blue Dawn, but it could be Joy, it could be Ivory Liquid, it could be 7th Generation. I don't care. It's a dish detergent. And the detergent is important because detergent breaks up molecules of organic matter and fats and proteins and helps them rinse away. Those little particles are going to be where the microbes hang out. We call it harborage. So you want to get rid of the little lumpy things first, okay? So gross visible soil moved off first, moisten, dish detergent, and then you're going to want to have a dedicated brush for your food contact surfaces. That means it doesn't clean out the kitty litter box, it doesn't scrape the mud off the boots. It's only used for food contact surfaces. And you're going to scrub that little bit of dish detergent into a good frothy foam. You're going to make sure that you get into all the nooks and crannies, any little cracks or rough spots. Although if you have a crack, please don't use that flat for microgreens. Sorry, harborage, what can I say? So any irregularities you want to scrub into a good foam. You're going to rinse it off. Generally, your EPA registered sanitizer is going to want to be applied to a relatively dry, but not completely dry surface. All right. And then you're going to observe the contact time and you're going to observe the drying time. Two really important things that people don't understand that exist. So you're going to take that jug of sanitizer and you're going to read the label, okay? Because it is a microbial pesticide in Maryland and all other states, and the label is the law. So sanitizers need a contact period. They're not instant. Even the alcohol in the doctor's office, they're kind of lax about that. But that requires a certain contact time. If you're using Clorox bleach, you need to have that contact time. You can't just spray it on and wipe it off with a paper towel. That doesn't do its job, okay? So the contact time and drying times need to be observed. Now, I know I've thrown this whole big, oh my gosh, I have to go out and get a sanitizer at you, but I gave you a resource, okay? Produce Safety Alliance is one of the organizations that really helps us all out in deciphering some of these federal laws on produce safety. And this is an interactive spreadsheet. The URL is down there that'll tell you just exactly what these various sanitizers will do for you, okay? So you want that URL. I did send around a PDF copy of my slides, so you guys should get that, okay? But wait a minute, what's wrong with all these things? I can buy these at Safeway. All right, why don't you want to use them? So first of all, they're not EPA registered as safe for use on food contact surfaces. Why? Because they contain fillers and emulsifiers and fragrances and dyes and other adjuvants, things that you don't want on your food. So whereas they may be very handy, you can buy them at Giant, Safeway, etc., they're not exactly good for food contact surface use, and they are absolutely not good for contact directly on fruits and vegetables that are consumed raw. So what's wrong with those? That's it. So I almost ought to stop for questions, but that's okay. That's up for you guys. All right, so moving on. We've talked about substrates. We know substrates can be contaminated. Can seed be contaminated? Absolutely. I mean, 100% yes. So in the United States, under FDA rule, microgreen seed actually has no need for a pretreatment. In Canada, sprouts and microgreens both need a pretreatment. In the United States, sprouts need a pretreatment, but microgreens don't. Don't ask me how the federal government works. So I'm going to give you a real quickie, how do you treat and make sure that you're not bringing contaminants in on your seed. And this is a chlorine seed treatment. Now, you want to use, please, you want to use an EPA registered sanitizer that is approved for direct contact with fruits and vegetables, okay? So that's going to be a minimum of those additional chemicals that we don't want to eat. So you're going to take your seeds, and I think this is for 1 pound of seed. Sorry, I forgot to put that in here. So you've got 1 pound of seed. You're going to agitate the seeds in a solution of 25 ounces of chlorine bleach, and please use the good stuff, to 100 ounces of potable water, all right? And you're going to use 1 teaspoon of a liquid detergent. That's going to act as a surfactant, and you're going to agitate them, not violently, stir them around for 1 minute. Then you're going to put those in a sieve. You're going to rinse under cold running water for 5 minutes to remove and to reduce all of the residual chlorine. Dry them in a single layer, and then you could do quite a few pounds, dry them, and then store them dry for use later. So that is chlorine, all right? But again, you want to get a chlorine product that is approved for direct contact with fruits and vegetables. So what if you don't do that? So John showed you those fuzzy little things that are, oh, they're just root hairs, but they're not, okay? So 2 years ago in 2023, I and my immediate supervisor, Chris Walsh, we will take and we will head up a capstone class. So a capstone class is a required project that is headed up by faculty in the plant science department. And these are our senior plant science department students, okay? And we actually used 2 different substrates. We used the core mat and we used a fiber mat. And this little fuzzy, which originally we said, oh, look at all those little root hairs. No, it quickly grew and overcame those seedlings. And it was a common fungus that causes damping off. And it came with the seed. We did not do any seed sterilization before we sowed this. And that was our first trial. Boom. For our second trial, we actually sterilized the core mats and we did a seed sanitation before we went to our second group of microgreens. And then we had no rhizopus at all with sanitizing before we grew. So this can happen. Where did Carol get the seeds? One of the major seed providers for microgreens and other seeds in the trade. Nothing too outlandish. You would know them if I told you the name. So I thought, well, what did the lightning just strike us? So I asked a couple of commercial microgreen growers if they had had the same problem with this particular provider and some others, and they said, oh, yes, we do. So it's out there, guys. I'm giving you the information. So now some folks like to use another product called Sanidate, and Sanidate is a different kind of disinfectant. And this is frequently one that is approved by organic standards. Okay, and I'm not going to go through it. You've got the handout so that you can read through the instructions. But I'm giving you both the chlorine-based and the Sanidate-based seed sterilization. In the United States, sprouts must be pre-treated. We know that the incidence of contaminated seed for sprouts is very, 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 very high. So it is governed by law. All right. So I've got a couple of YouTube videos on sanitizing seed, if that be your form of information, and I urge you to watch them. The first one is put out by our friends up north in Canada, where seed sanitation for microgreens is under law as well as sprouts. And then there's another one that gets into some of the nitty gritty of how you do it on a commercial basis in the second YouTube video. Just short, you probably find them interesting. Okay, so then the last one is water. Okay, so what is potable water? All right, well, it kind of depends on where you are. I'm sorry. The governments make it interesting, don't they? The federal standard is going to be no generic E. coli in 100 ml samples of water. The Maryland standard is more stringent. Aren't you glad you live in Maryland? Okay. And those tests that we would run or have run by an accredited lab, it can't be a home lab and it can't be your health department. This has to be a specific lab that is accredited for water testing for agriculture. All right. And in Maryland, we look for total coliform bacteria. It's got to be 0. Turbidity, which is the murkiness that you see in the water. Why would that be an issue? All right. Goes back to that harborage thing. If you've got little tiny particles of dirt in your water, it's murky. You've got a greater chance of some bacteria hanging out on those little particles. So turbidity less than 10 NTUs. And in Maryland, we limit the amount of nitrates that people can be exposed to. This is very dangerous for pregnant women and young children. So it depends on where you are as to what your potable water standard is. If you're on municipal water, your municipality will have a website, and they do this testing and a whole lot more. So you can go to your municipality website and you can see what your water standards are that are available on the turn of the tap. But there's one other thing that you need to do. You can have wonderful water coming to the main, but then what you do with it once it goes from the main through your pipes to your point of use, your faucet or your hose, that's up to you to make sure that your water distribution system has no leaks, no rust, no other issues. See that conglomeration of hoses? Does that look like something you might have at home? Okay. Because if water can leak out, contamination can get in, okay? So potable water, but make sure that your water distribution system is up to standards. And on that, I'll take some questions. I do have to let you know that I am part of the Food Science Food Safety Group, and I am part of the Maryland Food Safety Network, and we have a weekly newsletter, and we have a website and a YouTube channel. Yes, we're really in. And there's my email, and you're most welcome to email me with any questions if you're too shy to talk about them now. Okay. And on that,
Awesome.
Stephanie, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Carol. So we did get a lot of questions and also just a lot of appreciation for your presentation in general. People were really excited about it. So there's one from the Q&A. Folks are wondering if using untreated water from a spring would be okay.
No. Sorry. Oh my gosh, no. Okay, because you don't know what's in that water. You just
Right.
don't. And we like to think that if it tastes good to us and it looks kind of okay, it must be fine. No,
Right.
you really, if you've got a spring, you're going to want to have some water testing done, and I can give you more information if you want. Cat ran through. Yeah, problem from working from home is when you have cats. They always have to be part of the party. All right.
Of course.
So no. Now, I could say that you could boil that water. If you wanted to boil it for about 10 minutes, that's probably going to kill any microbes. And then you could use that spring water. But that's making you work harder, and I don't want to make you work
Right.
harder.
Right. Thank you. Okay. Do food pantries also require the GAP and GHP protocols?
No, but they sure should.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if this is not my purview. Food pantries, depending probably on bulk or dollar amount, might fall under health department. and health department is not us. We actually, in some instances, seem to be a little bit more stringent on fresh fruits and vegetable safeties than public health does.
Got it. All right. So folks are asking, would you not suggest using compost for your vegetable gardens unless there is a kill step?
Okay, so I knew I should have put this slide in. All right. So what we like to recommend is observing the National Organic Program, the 90-120-day rule. And I can just very briefly tell you what it is. If the soil or the compost touches the edible portion of the crop, you want 120 days between application and harvest, which means that if you're prepping your garden now for lettuces to be sown in the spring, greater than 120 days, you're fine. But if you're going to sow your lettuces on a garden where you apply compost and manures, and you must incorporate that 2 weeks before you plant your seed, so it's 120 days and 2 weeks, all right, then you're going to get into jeopardy. You're going to increase your risk of contamination. So the 90-day rule is if the manure or the compost does not touch the edible portion of the crop. Think like an apple tree, okay? Apples are up there, roots are down there. Then 90 days between application of your compost and manure until harvest. So that's the 120-90-day rule, and I think it's a good one to go by. So yes, use your compost and manures, but use your head when you use them.
Just to be clear, that what Carol's talking about are animal-based compost, not plant-based compost.
Yes, that is true.
Thank you, John. Important distinction. Okay, the next question is about using the Sanidate product, Sanidate 5.0. Is that okay for seed contact?
Well, gosh, whoever asked that is really getting deep into the weeds. So I communicate with MDA, food quality assurance folks, all the time. They're the regulators, I'm the educator. So we talk a lot. And I had wanted to add the Sanidate to my slide set because chlorine products are okay. They got some downsides with working with them on certain surfaces. Sanidate is what Organic Standard usually talks about more. And no, Sanidate 5.0 does not have anything on the label about using it for seed prep. Sanidate 12 does. So the label is the law, guys. I'm going to have to say that to be accurate, Sanidate 12 has the information on seed sterilization or sanitation. Sorry.
Awesome. All right. I think this question might be in reference to planting vegetables in compost. Can you just wash it? And I think they're meaning, can you wash the produce, or do contaminants somehow get inside the plant?
All right, you're gonna make me commit, aren't you?
Or making Carol pull her hair out.
when I don't talk to the public, and that's kind of you guys, when I talk to commercial growers, even though under law, the consumer has the responsibility of washing the produce, the grower does not, okay? I work with growers. I am adamant, enthusiastic about good agricultural practices because you can't always wash it off. That means that I've got to teach our producers how to avoid contamination from the get-go. All right, there are certain vegetables that either through their texture or they've got very permeable skin or they grow in contact with the ground, they're going to be a high risk for contamination. And then if they're the type of vegetable or fruit that is typically eaten raw, and I still eat cantaloupes, all right, I'm a wild child, all right, then you've got a higher risk of contamination. So you can't wash it off, but I always tell the consumers, wash your produce. And you really want to, because you never can tell who's been handling it before you. So a good steady stream of water and a little bit of finger pressure is all that you need. And that's all you want. And you want to do what we call single pass water. That means the faucet comes on and you run water over your vegetables. You do not want to fill your sink full of water Add whatever you think is going to, whatever concoction you think and you've been sold is going to wash your vegetables. They lie. They're not washing your vegetables. Okay. A sink full of vegetables is a good way to increase your chances of cross contamination.
Yeah,
See, I said
makes
it.
sense. All right. Can we use worm castings?
No. Well, yes, you can. They are now considered a biological soil amendment of animal origin, so that you would have to apply any of the contingencies that you would with chicken manure or cow manure or anybody else's manure.
Got it.
So fully
Um,
composted, incorporated, use that 120, 90-day rule.
Makes sense. Good. Okay. Are sprouting jars safe? I use them for sprouting alfalfa seeds.
You want to do everything I told you to do on cleaning and sanitizing.
Yeah.
So the screen, if you're using the mason jar, and I've been doing sprouts for a long time. You know, if you're using a mason jar, an old mayonnaise jar, and a ring, and a little bit of screening, clean and sanitize, clean and sanitize, clean and sanitize.
Okay.
And I would
In general,
sanitize my seed. Sorry, Stephanie. I would definitely
yes,
sanitize my seed.
yes. Someone is asking if you can use hydrogen peroxide to sanitize seeds.
No. Okay.
I love these straightforward answers. It's great.
It's okay. You know, you get to be a certain age, you just shoot straight. So
I
what's
like
the
it.
dealy what's the dealy do with that? All right. So everything in good agricultural practices and the produce safety rule is science-based. I am a scientist.
Mhm.
Hydrogen
Yes, you are.
peroxide simply just doesn't work. And this goes back to your vegetable washes and all of that other claptrap that is out there in the market. Really, running potable water, a little bit of food, finger pressure. If it's a carrot, you might want to have that dedicated scrub brush. Didn't hit
Mhm.
any floors or any boots or anything. And you know, use that agitation to clean it up. So running water and a little bit of finger pressure or brush. You're done.
Got it. All right. How do you sanitize vegetables in general, which we kind of just answered? And is vinegar sufficient, and how much would
No,
you use?
no, it's another one of those old wives' tales that that just doesn't bear up. I mean, you acidify your water a little bit. Big deal.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
I'm sorry, it just doesn't work.
Yep.
You can
Good to
do
know.
whatever you want in your own kitchens, guys.
How about the liquid soap that they sell at Trader Joe's or other stores for
Um,
fruits or veggies?
no, you don't need it.
Right.
Okay. Does it smell good? Does it have a color? That means it's got adjuvants in it, probably has thickeners and other stuff. And, you know, as a society, we make some important decisions based on advertising. And as I tell
Mhm.
my students when I'm in a classroom, drill down, find the source, find the science behind that. Just don't go by the advertising. And for God's sake, stay off the internet.
So true. Awesome. Okay. Oh, wait, there's one more question that came in. Can you wash microgreens and baby greens in water and spin them dry with like a salad spinner?
Yeah, you'd have to be careful that you don't mush them too much. Sometimes those salad spinners can be pretty strong.
Yeah.
But absolutely, you know. But now I'm going to tell you, I want you to clean and sanitize your salad spinner.
Yeah, of course.
Of course.
Absolutely.
I don't know about your salad spinner, but mine kind of gets a little cruddy in the little cracks and crevices, and I go, ew. And I just want to toss out to all of you Master Gardener folks, even though it is not specifically covered by my grant, I talk to Master Gardeners and I can come talk to you.
Thank you, Carol. And Carol has, if you've been to some of our Grow It, Eat It meetings, she's been an excellent guest speaker for us. And I think this information is great. And having the opportunity to be able to ask you straightforward on the record all these questions is honestly an invaluable piece of expertise and opportunity that we have the opportunity to take advantage of. So thank you, Carol. We appreciate that.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate your interest and I hope to see you at a Master Gardener meeting soon.
Excellent. Thank you, Carol and John. Thank you for being with us at the beginning. wonderful as always. And all of our master gardeners who are here today really appreciate it so much. Gonna go ahead and stop.